Well, good morning, and thank you for the invitation to be here. It's great to be back before the women voters. This is always a nice crowd to come to, and I want to congratulate the League on your 90th anniversary and the 90th anniversary of the women's vote. And I always look forward to receiving the news from your organization and reading your newsletter, and I think you're a great organization promoting in a bipartisan way citizenship in Illinois and in Central Illinois. Let me first of all introduce my main woman voter, and that's my wife Donna is with me today. I am very pleased to be here as a candidate for re-election in the 91st District. It has been my privilege to serve. This is my 8th term in the legislature representing the 91st District. I'm very proud of my record of accomplishment, fighting for the citizens of my district, the communities of my district, both in Springfield and back here at home. It's no question these are challenging times. This term has been, I think, perhaps the most difficult 2 years in the history of the state. We began, as Representative Gordon said, she had a baptism by fire. We began with a major constitutional crisis, perhaps the biggest crisis the state has faced with the impeachment and the removal from office of our chief executive. We went right from that into the biggest fiscal crisis the state has faced, certainly since the Great Depression, but perhaps in the history of our state. We have major issues and problems facing us, and we haven't been able to address all of them during this term. We haven't been able to do so because of partisan gridlock, frankly, in Springfield. And that's very upsetting and frustrating. It's frustrating for me. I know it's frustrating for the voters. We work best when we work together. We have a history and a reputation of doing that in the Peoria area. We work across party lines with Democrats and Republicans in the legislature, and we get results when we do that. And that's definitely what we need to see more of in Springfield on a grander scale to solve the serious problems that plague our state. So I look forward to your questions this morning, and I thank you again for the invitation.
To balance the budget of the state of Illinois, please give specifics of how to balance it, and be specific as to the types of cuts or tax increases. And then there's a second part to that question. Is this on the budget too? No, that's all right. The second part, because that'll be enough. The second part of this question is one of the primary functions of the legislature is to balance the budget. And for the incumbents, why did you leave town without doing that? And for the challengers, what do you think they should have done? Okay. So they each will have 2 minutes to answer this question.
Well, first of all, I agree. We did not get into this mess overnight. We have been overspending for at least the last decade. And I think that anyone that believes that we can fix that overspending in one budget cycle isn't being quite realistic. I think the current deficit that we're facing realistically is going to take a few years and a tremendous amount of fiscal discipline to overcome. We have to stop spending more than we bring in. We have to. And as much as I dislike this option, we may need to look at a plan of short-term borrowing to help bridge the gap in the interim. But one thing I know for certain is that we have to work in a bipartisan effort to have real, meaningful spending cuts and responsible spending cuts before we can consider borrowing as a best option. I will be in favor of a forensic audit so that we can go line by line and cut wasteful government spending. What happened in the past year, one of the main jobs of the legislature is to pass a budget. And the fact that that budget wasn't passed and that the legislature left town without passing a budget and handed authority to Governor Quinn away from themselves, I believe is very telling. Again, I know I'm short on time. The bottom line, we have to stop spending more than we have. Thank you.
This is definitely the biggest issue, I think, facing the state. As I said, our fiscal crisis is perhaps the most severe that we have faced, and we're not alone. I think most of the 50 states have had some degree of fiscal crisis because of the recession. I think this is a real opportunity, though, for us to fundamentally change the way we do business in Springfield. We have operated really with this lapse period spending for years, at least for 30 years. Governor Thompson was perhaps the master of pushing off 1 year's bills into the next year to make it look like we have a balanced budget. What we did this year is no different than what was done in the early 90s for Governor Edgar when we gave emergency budget powers to the governor. We have a serious crisis in terms of revenue and in terms of spending. We've taken action over the last 3 years to cut nearly $4 to $5 billion out of the budget. I think that's very important. We also passed major pension reform this year, which will help realize savings in our escalating pension costs. But the other part of it is we need additional revenue. And I've never shirked from that. That may not be the most politically popular thing to say, but I believe in being honest with my constituents, with the people that I represent. And there's no way we can cut our way out of a $13 billion deficit and solve the problems and the issues that we care about in this state. So I believe it's got to be a combination of additional revenue, additional cuts, and the pension reform that we did this spring. Thank you.
Now we're going to ask the second question here that I tried to tack on the first time. One of the most primary functions of the legislature is to balance the budget. So for the incumbents, why did you leave town without doing so? And the others can respond if they would like. They may have some ideas on what they think they could have done.
Well, again, I agree that we need to work in a bipartisan fashion, and I by no means am taking anything away from the fact that I do admit that it is a very difficult process to go through, and it is not an easy process, but that's the job that they were elected to do. That's the job that needs to be done. And on the East Peoria City Council, of course, there's always competing interests, and it's always difficult in our budget process. And in fact, this last budget process, after the first rounds of requests came in, we had a $1 million shortfall. Well, it would have been easy for us to just walk away and leave that and say, well, there's nothing we can do. But what did we do? We have a very diverse group, and we worked together. We worked together in a bipartisan fashion. We worked together to close that gap. We worked together to set our priorities, and we ended up passing a balanced budget. Was it easy? Absolutely not. It was very difficult, but that's the job that we're elected to do, and that's the job that we did. Thank you.
Well, first of all, I think it's important to point out that we did pass a budget this year. It was not a budget, I think, that anyone left Springfield feeling happy about. There were serious issues that we were not able to address, and I think the clear indication or the feeling of most of the legislature, as Representative Gordon said, was that we would be back to do unfinished business. It's an election year, and everybody in Springfield knew that. So there was a lot of hesitation to really make the tough decisions that have to be made, and there was a lack of willingness to work together in a partisan fashion. Now you might say the Democrats have the majority in both houses, and we have the governor's office, but the fact of the matter is we have to do on major issues like bonding and revenue increases, we have to have a supermajority. And in order to do that in the House, we have to have a bipartisan roll call. And that simply was not going to happen, as Representative Gordon indicated, could not be done because I think the other side realized it's an election year and wanted to take these issues to the voters. That's unfortunate. This is a crisis, and we need real leadership to solve the problems. As I said, the emergency budget powers that we gave to Governor Quinn will help us in this interim period as we get through to January and it's no different than powers that were given to Governor Edgar back in the 90s. But our fiscal problems are deep-seated and deep-rooted. They go back generations. They go back through several governors, through several administrations. The current recession that we're in has brought all those issues to a head. And this is the time, as a crisis, I believe, as an opportunity to change the way we do business. So I'm looking forward to some changes in Springfield. I hope there are new faces to join us in the legislature, to work with all of us to roll up our sleeves and solve these budget issues once and for all and put us on the right track.
Do you know who we are? PCCEO, helping people, changing lives for every stage of life.
Okay, we're going to move on to pension questions. And the first question is, do you believe pension benefits for current state employees should be reduced or changed?
Well, it's true that past legislatures have robbed the pension funds, like what was already said. And first and foremost, I think those pension funds need to stop being robbed. We need to pay what's obligated to be paid. And I have a track record on the East Peoria City Council of fully funding our pension funds in the city of East Peoria to the penny of what our actuarial report says that should be contributed. I agree with my opponent in the recent reform that was passed that we'd need a two-tiered system. I agree with that part of the reform bill that was passed and my opponent supported. What I disagree with in the recent reform that was passed in the manner is the manner in which it was passed. It was passed in less than 24 hours. It was passed in the 11th hour with little to no input from the unions and with little to no input from the general public. It was rammed through. Now, we do need meaningful reform, but I believe firmly in order to get that meaningful reform, we have to bring all parties to the table that deserve to have a seat at the table, and we need to work together to find where that reform is. There are also maybe other areas where we need to make adjustments. For example, currently the state of Illinois is assuming an 8.5% rate of return on the pension funds. Now, ladies and gentlemen, I don't know about you, but I don't know of how many, there's very few portfolios that I've seen in the recent years that have an 8.5% of return. Again, I'm out of time, but I'll just conclude by saying we do need reform. We need to bring all parties to the table and discuss that meaningful reform. Thank you.
The pension crisis is another one of the crises that we face in Illinois, and we passed significant reform this spring in changing many of the problems that have plagued our public pensions. To answer the question, I believe, was, do I believe that pension benefits for current employees or current retirees should be changed? Absolutely, I do not believe that. The Constitution in our state guarantees the security of those benefits for current employees and for current retirees. The changes that were made in the pension reform legislation are for new hires starting January 1, and will create a two-tier system, and will also eliminate many of the abuses that we have seen in the past, especially double dipping into more than one public pension, and the particularly high salary increases in the final years before retirement that we have seen, allowing people to retire with a pension making more than they did when they were working. Those are the type of abuses that need to end with public pensions, and they have with the reform that we passed. We need to stay on track in this 50-year repayment plan. We're 15 years into it to make sure that we get to a 90% funding ratio in our public pensions. And to do that, we need to make sure that we fully fund our pensions each and every year.